Well, in 1966, my mother was struggling. She had 6 children. My father was away in the UK working, which was quite common at that time. There was no social services or backup for single parents. So she didn't have much money and she couldn't look after us, so she went to the parish priest. So he found High Park in Dublin and we were taken there, myself and 3 of my siblings. I was quite excited about the thought of going into a place that was going to have food. But when I got in there, I realised, ooh, this looks dark. It was a very abusive, authoritarian, repressive system that was not loving or supportive in any way. You know, we were hungry, we were cold, we were beaten. I was sexually abused in that place. I was 9.
Mary was sexually abused by a layperson not attached to the industrial school in High Park. 6 years after she left, she suffered further abuse.
I was sexually abused, this time by a priest, when I was about 60. Anyway, I decided to report that priest, and they told me that I wouldn't be believed anyway, so there was no point in taking my complaint any further. And I thought, let me get out of this bloody country, you know.
From the time she was a baby, Phyllis Morgan lived in 2 institutions in Dublin. She was released the day before her 16th birthday.
There was a sense of shame because you felt like you'd just come out of prison. I think that was the feeling a lot of us had. I felt in Ireland I was never going to achieve anything, because I had worked with a private dressmaker, and she used to always say to me, "You don't have a Dublin accent, you sure you're from Dublin?" And I just say, "Well, yeah." "Whereabouts in Dublin?" I said, "Well, I was brought up with the nuns." And she said, "Oh my God, we can't have your sort working here." So she had my cards as it was then. "Take that and get out."
Most children were released from institutions when the capitation grant ceased at the age of 16. Marked by their experiences and by the stigma attached to industrial schools, thousands fled the country, mainly to England.
The lovely thing about coming over here, you found it straight away that nobody had questions. When I went for that first job, he never questioned. He just asked me what my name was. "Can you do sewing?" I said, "Yeah, I can." None of this, "Who's your family? Where'd you come from?" All these questions that in Ireland you get asked.
They'd kept what had happened to them completely to themselves. In social circles, their own children, very rarely did anybody know what had happened to them. So they took all the burden of that, and they often talked about a stigma they felt.
There was people who were homeless, there was people who were imprisoned, and it not only affected the individuals but also their family, and they felt isolated and rejected by Ireland. They were disadvantaged in Britain because they were part of the Irish who had left with such disdain and feeling of shame, you know.
It is true that some of the survivors would deliberately avoid Irish communities in a sense because they felt like they'd be found out. Even though they were the victims, they felt like they had something to hide.
On BBC Coventry in Warwickshire.
Do you feel like you never really found what you truly wanted to do?
When I was 16, I come to England.
Sometimes in life, though, you can't reach.
Cut myself off from the Irish completely because I didn't want them to know my background. I then involved myself with mostly British people, which helped me to get on. I went into the building and then I went into bus conducting.
Andy never spoke in any detail to his wife or his children about his time in the industrial school.
I didn't want them to know because if they didn't know, they couldn't talk about it. They did find out bits and pieces from other people. My daughter spoke to me once, twice, and I said to her, don't worry about it, it's water under the bridge.
But is it water under the bridge?
Not really, no. Not really.
Why?
It's so painful, to be honest. It's even painful now.
That's all for this edition. Thank you for listening and goodbye.
I was listening to Beat Lover. When I went to England, I had no skills, no reading and writing. Because of all the trauma, I couldn't actually learn. I went to work in the Glen Eagle Hotel in Harpenden, and that's where I met my boyfriend, and I fell pregnant. I thought, oh shit, what am I going to do now? I went into a mother and baby home in London. They said, the Catholic Society up in Ladbroke Grove would like to see you. So I went up there and she took out this piece of paper and she said, just sign there. We'll find a nice Catholic family for your baby. And I said, you can take that piece of paper and shove it up your arse so far that you cannot move because you are not getting my child. 2 weeks after Paul was born, I married my boyfriend.
Mary went on to have 3 children. She taught herself to read and write. In her mid-30s, she went to university and then did a PhD.
My PhD was survival, redress and recovery. I was on a mission, and my mission was to educate myself and to make a difference.
In 2001, Bertie Ahern's government took a twin-track approach to make amends for the abuse of children in residential institutions. The first was a commission of inquiry, which would be paid for by the state. The second was a redress scheme to compensate survivors. The state looked for a contribution from the religious orders for this.
The position of the state was that there should be a 50-50 split in the cost by the state and by the orders, because of course it was the members of the orders who had perpetrated the abuse on these unfortunate children.
The initial government estimate for redress was between 254 and 380 million euros.
The religious congregations, they never agreed in the first place to that 50% idea. They felt that that would be a reflection on culpability of their membership, and they were very concerned at that stage because there's nothing been established independently about what abuse did take place and who were the abusers.
Negotiations got underway between a government team led by Education Minister Michael Woods and representatives of the 18 religious orders that ran the institutions.
On the side of the religious orders, it wasn't a few doddery old priests and naive old nuns that were negotiating for them. It was Arthur Cox solicitors, the biggest and most potent firm of solicitors in the state. So they were taking these negotiations very seriously from the start, I suspect, because they knew what was at stake.
State negotiators sought €190 million, half the higher estimated cost. Records now reveal the state was willing to cap the contributions of the religious orders at €127 million. The congregations made an offer of €108 million. This was not accepted. After leaks to the media, talks collapsed.
The Conference of Religious in Ireland became dissatisfied and requested that the Attorney General's office and the Taoiseach's office should be out of the picture completely, and that they would negotiate only with the Minister and his Secretary and have nobody else present.
After months of stalemate, Michael Woods agreed to this request. 2 meetings later, a deal was done. The religious orders agreed to pay €128 million towards redress, in return for an indemnity from any future legal action concerning child abuse.
Various court proceedings which are in place now or could be in place in the immediate future will be taken over by the government in return for the contribution that we are making.
They will act as defendants?
They will, yes.
On the 5th of June 2002, the agreement between Church and State was brought to the final cabinet meeting of the outgoing government. Despite warnings from the Attorney General that there was no way to increase the religious orders' contributions if the number of redress cases increased, the Cabinet approved the deal.
Minister Michael Woods defended the agreement as fair.
I think there was that window, you're talking about the last Cabinet meeting, and this is something, by the way, that has been negotiated in the best interest of everybody to bring it to closure, and that's how it got through. And in retrospect, in my view, that was a mistake at the time.
We have a system of cabinet government precisely to ensure that sort of thing doesn't happen, because it's not just the Taoiseach and Michael Woods. There's 15 around that table, and that's their job. There was objections from the Attorney General's office, but everybody sat on their hands.
But one of the big questions remaining is, how much will this deal cost?
The report suggested today that we could be looking at